Good day, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I am Ria Rose Radocasil from Group 3. I'm here today to talk to you about biodiversity. So, first of all, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is defined as all the variety of life that can be found on Earth. Plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms, as well as to the communities that they form and the habitats in which they live. Comes from the words bio meaning life and diversity meaning variability. Biodiversity, as the name itself suggests, is the diversity in biology over a place. Biodiversity is the heart of the planet and must be preserved as it is. It provides so many useful resources necessary for the survival. Moving on, importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity is important to humans for many reasons. Biodiversity is also considered by many to have intrinsic value. That is, each species has a value and a right to exist, whether or not it is known to have value to humans. For example, a larger number of plants species means a greater variety of crops. And the next one, greater species diversity ensures natural sustainability for all life forms. And the last one, healthy ecosystems can better withstand and recover from a variety of disasters. And so, while we dominate this planet, we still need to preserve the diversity in wildlife. So why we need diversity? Example contributions to human life: food, clothing, shelter, pollination of crops, antibiotics and medicines, and lastly, biological process or nitrogen fixation. And the biodiversity book by the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, or CSRO, describe 5 core and interacting values that humans place on biodiversity. Firstly, economic. Biodiversity provides humans with raw materials for consumption and production. Many livelihoods, such as those of farmers, fishers, and timber workers, are dependent on biodiversity. Secondly, ecological life support. Biodiversity provides functioning ecosystems that supply oxygen, clean air and water, pollination of plants, pest control, wastewater treatment, and many ecosystem services. Thirdly, recreation. Many recreational pursuits rely on our unique biodiversity, such as birdwatching, hiking, camping, and fishing. Our tourism industry also depends on biodiversity. Fourthly, cultural. The Australian culture is closely connected to biodiversity through the expression of identity, through spirituality, and through aesthetic appreciation. Indigenous Australians have strong connections and obligations to biodiversity, arising from spiritual beliefs about animals and plants. And lastly, scientific. Biodiversity represents a wealth of systematic ecological data that help us to understand the natural world and its origin. And now, let's moving on to our next topic.
So there are 3 levels of biodiversity. First is ecosystem diversity, second is species diversity, and third is genetic diversity. So these 3 levels of biodiversity work together in order to create the complexity life on Earth. First, we will tackle about ecosystem diversity, followed by species diversity, and lastly, the genetic diversity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. I am Merly Rabutin from Group 3. This afternoon, I'm going to tackle about ecosystem diversity. So, what is ecosystem diversity? So, the variety of different habitats, communities, and ecological processes. A biological community by the species that occupy a particular area and the interactions between those species. The enormous range of terrestrial and aquatic environments on Earth has been classified into a number of ecosystems. Major habitat types include tropical rainforest, grasslands, wetlands, coral reefs, mangroves, deserts, mountains, rivers, oceans, freshwater ecosystem, and savanna. Savanna, it means like all the wild animals living in that area. When human beings modify the already existing ecosystem to meet their purpose or create an ecosystem of their own that mimics the natural condition, those are called artificial ecosystems. There are two combined properties. The first one is biodiversity. It means biodiversity, it's a biotic properties. So biotic describes a living component of an ecosystem. For example, organisms such as plants and animals. Examples: water, light, wind, soil, humidity, minerals, and gases. All living things, autotrophs and heterotrophs, plants, fungi, and bacteria. So the second one is geodiversity. Geodiversity means biotic properties. So biotic properties such as rocks, minerals, fossils, landforms, sediments, and soils, together with the natural processes which form and alter them. So geodiversity, I will define geodiversity. It means a variety of the geological and physical elements of nature. Examples of ecosystem diversity here, as I said earlier, like desert, rainforest, and coral reefs. So there are four services of ecosystem. So the first one is provisioning services. So provisioning services, provisioning, it means a type of benefit to people that can be extracted from nature. So there are four, like food production, water, wood and fiber, and fuel. So the next one is supporting services, like nutrient cycling, soil formation, primary production, and habitat provision. Then the next one is spiritual or cultural services, like spiritual, aesthetic, educational, and recreational. Then the last one is regulating services, like climate regulation, flood regulation, and water purification. Regulating services, like it is the benefit provided by the ecosystem. So that's all for the ecosystem diversity. Thank you.
So now we will tackle about species diversity. In species diversity, from the word species, it will usually talk about species. So what exactly is a species diversity? It is defined as the number of different species present in an ecosystem and relative abundance of each of those species. In simple words, it is a variety of species and the abundance of species within a specific habitat. So, from this picture, we can see a variety of plants and animals living across the world. So, there are two constituents of species diversity. First is a species richness, which refers to the number of different species present in an ecosystem. So in species richness, it usually answers the question, how many species there is in an ecosystem. So the larger the number of species there is in a specific habitat, the higher the species richness is. And the second one is species evenness. It is the relative abundance of individuals of each of those species. So in this, it usually answers a question how rare or common the species is in a specific habitat. So if the number of individuals within a species is fairly or equally distributed among the community, then it is said to have a high species evenness. But if not, it is considered to have a low species evenness. So high species evenness will lead to a higher or a greater species diversity. So what exactly is a species? A species is a group of organisms that are capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. And species is the basic units of biological classification. And in order to illustrate that, I have here varieties of animals, the frog and an earthworm. So if you take two frogs and breed them together, then they will produce a fertile offspring because they are of the same species and their genetics would work together. But if we breed together a frog and an earthworm and combine their genetic material, then it would not produce a fertile offspring because their genetics just wouldn't work together. So in order to breed and produce a fertile offspring, they have to be of the same species. So species, rather than spreading out evenly across the world, different groups of organisms or species live in specific habitats. We take here the giraffes, which we usually found on Africa, and the squirrels, which we can usually found on forestry areas like the northern part of Canada or parts of Europe, and lastly the penguins, which can usually found on colder areas like the Antarctic. There are so many different species around the world, but I just give some random examples. So coral reefs and rainforests are examples of ecosystems with high species diversity. Why? Because in rainforest, the components being found in there provides continuous growing seasons which allow many varieties of plants and animals to live in and thrive. While in the coral reefs, more than 25% of all marine life live in there. So the more species there is in a specific ecosystem or habitat, the higher or the greater the species diversity is. So before ending my topic, I have a little trivia. So according to what I have researched, the scientists have estimated that there are around 8.7 million species of plants and animals in existence. Currently, 1.64 million have been identified, so that's 81% left to find. There are many species all around the world that have not been identified yet. So that's all.
Hello everyone, I am Jane Bikitong from Group 3. Now I will discuss about genetic diversity. What is genetic diversity? Genetic diversity is the total number of genetic characteristics in the genetic makeup of a species. It ranges widely from the number of species to differences within species and can be attributed to the span of survival for a species. Genetic diversity, so it is the diversity within the species which can act as the major reason for the distinguishing characteristics expressed by each individual. Genetic diversity, so even within a one species, we can have organisms that have genetic diversity. So next is individuals within a species are genetically quite similar, which allows them to produce fertile offspring. So we said before that a species has to have organisms which can breed together to make fertile offspring. So two frogs coming together of the same species will make a frog as an offspring which is fertile anything go and produce other if they were two different species, this might produce an organism. And if it does, it wouldn't be fertile, so they have to be genetically similar to a point where their genes can combine to make a new frog, but you can still see diversity in the species as well. So next is small genetic differences can have relatively large effects on the phenotype of an organism. So if we were to take the species of the dog, we know the dogs come in lots of different shapes, size, colors, and have various features. They are still the same species because they can breed together to produce fertile offspring. They can make new dogs which are first whole, but within the dog species, we have different dogs with different genetics, different genes. For example, some are bigger, some are smaller, some are black, brown, white. It's lots of variety in the species itself. So there's small genetic differences where they can have large effects on the phenotype. And the phenotype is the physical appearance based on genes. So lastly is populations with high genetic diversity tend to be healthier than a highly inbred population with low genetic diversity. So for example, for humans, if there's a large population and a large genetic diversity, this is healthier as opposed to a particular area where there is inbreeding going on. The genetic diversity goes down, and the genetic are very similar to each other, and this is less healthy, and we can define genetic diversity as a measure of all of the genes possessed by the individuals in a population or a whole species type, or we can just talk about the whole species. Wherever they are so high genetic diversity will mean there's more of a mixture of genes for a species, but if there's a low genetic diversity, there's a lot of less. And that would be all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am going to discuss about the biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss, it is refers to the decline or disappearance of the biological diversity, understood as the variety of living things that inhabit the planet. Its different levels of biological organization and the respective genetic variability, as well as the natural pattern present in our ecosystem. So there are the causes of biodiversity loss. First is habitat loss. It is caused by the deforestation, overpopulation, pollution, and global warming. Species that are physically large and those living on the forest or oceans are more affected of reduction. Second is invasive species. So invasive species refer to those that would normally remain constrained from ecosystem because of the presence of natural barriers, since these barriers are no longer. Existing invasive species invade the ecosystem, destroying native species. Third is overexploitation. Overexploitation is caused by activities such as overfishing, overhunting, excessive logging, and illegal trade of wildlife. Fourth is climate change associated from global warming, which is the modification of Earth climate caused by burning fossil fuels is caused by industry and human activities. Fifth is pollution. The various forms of pollution, including the water pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, and agricultural pollution, pose a serious threat to the biological system, destroying animal, plants, habitats due to the release of toxic substances and chemicals. So, moreover, the effects of biodiversity loss is loss of many consequences, not only for the human beings, but also in the economic and health level. So moving forward, we move to the summary. Biodiversity is the variety of all species, their genetic information, their contain, and the ecosystem they form. There are three levels of biodiversity. First is ecosystem, is the variety of habitats, natural communities, and ecological processes in the biosphere. Second is species diversity. Species diversity is the variety of species on Earth. It refers to both the number of species and the human of individuals within species. Third is genetic diversity, is the total of genetic information contained in the genes of all species. So, that's all for the group. Thank you for listening, and may